There it is.
Hello, friends. Today until noon, we have a talk on action and inaction, followed at 12:05 with a continuation of our study on the Book of Images, starting where we left off last time. Next Sunday at 11 o'clock, we will be continuing our study on the key to Theosophy. And the declaration of EOT?
Sure. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. The three fundamentals?
Sure, I'd be happy to touch on those.
Thank
There are
you.
three fundamental propositions in the philosophy of Theosophy, and the first one postulates an omnipresent, eternal, and boundless, immutable principle upon which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception, and could only be dwarfed by any human expression. Therefore, it has been called beingness rather than being, and it is the one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. The second fundamental proposition is that of law or cycles. And this proposition states that cycles is a fundamental law of the universe. We can see it in every department of nature, and it manifests all the way up to the appearance and disappearance of worlds, which is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. So from the eternal absolute reality mentioned in the first principle comes the universe into existence periodically. So this law of periodicity is something that we can see in our own lives in day and night, sleeping and waking, life and death. The third fundamental proposition is that every monad goes through an obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of incarnation or necessity in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. And it states that no spiritual divine soul can have an independent conscious existence before that spark has passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world and acquired individuality first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, and thus it ascends through all the degrees of intelligence from the lowest to the highest, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, that of a Dhyani Buddha. This proposition admits of no special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit through a long series of reincarnations.
Thank you. Our reading for today is from the Bhagavad Gita. And it starts, or generally speaking, at one time, O Krishna, thou praisest the renunciation of action, and yet again its right performance. Tell me for certainty which of the two is better. Krishna responds, renunciation of action and devotion through action are both means of final emancipation. But of these two, devotion through action is better than renunciation. He is considered to be an ascetic who seeks nothing and nothing rejects. Being free from the influence of the pairs of opposites, O thou almighty arms, without trouble, he is released from the bonds forged by action. Children only, and not the wise, speak of renunciation of action and of right performance of action as being different. He who perfectly practices this one receives the fruits of both, and the place for which is gained by the renouncer of action is also attained by him who is devoted to action. That man seeth with clear sight, who seeth that the Sankhya and the Yoga doctrines are identical. But to attain to true renunciation of action without devotion through action is difficult, O thou almighty arms. While the devotee who is engaged in the right performance of action and the place which is gained by the renouncer of action is also attained by him who is devoted in action. The man seeth with clear sight, who seeth that the Sankhya and the Yoga doctrines are identical. But to attain to true renunciation of action without devotion through action is difficult, O thou almighty arms. While the devotee who is engaged in the right performance of his duties approacheth the Supreme Spirit in no long time. The man of purified heart, having his body fully controlled, his senses restrained, and from whom the only self is the self of all creatures, is not tainted, although performing action. The devotee who knows the divine truth may thinking, I am doing nothing, in seeking, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, even when speaking, letting go or taking, opening or closing of his eyes, he saith, the senses and organs move by natural impulse to the appropriate objects. Whoever is in action dedicates his actions to the Supreme Spirit and puts aside all selfish interest in their result, is untouched by sin, even as a leaf of the lotus is unaffected by the waters. Truly devoted for the purification of the heart, perform actions with their bodies, their minds, their understanding, their senses, putting away all self-interest. The man who is devoted and not attached to the fruit of his actions attains tranquility, whilst he who through desire and attraction for the fruit of action is bound down thereby. The self-restrained sage, having with his heart renounced all actions, dwells at rest in the 9-gate city of his abode, neither acting nor causing to action. The illuminated sage regards with equal mind and illumination, selfless Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even an outcast who eats the flesh of dogs. Those who thus preserve an equal mind gain heaven even in this life. For the supreme to free from sin and equal-minded, therefore they rest in the Supreme Spirit. The man who knoweth the Supreme Spirit, who is not deluded, and who is fixed on him, does not rejoice at obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieve when meaning what is unpleasant. He whose heart is not attached to objects of sense finds pleasure within himself, and through devotion united with the Supreme enjoys imperishable bliss. For those enjoyments which arise through the contact with the senses with these external objects are wounds of pain, since they have beginning and an end. O son of Kunti, the wise man delighteth not in these. He who are living in this world before the liberation of the soul from the body can resist impulse arising from desire and anger is a devotee and blessed. The man who is happy with himself, who is illumination within sin, illumined within, is a devotee, and partaking of the nature of the Supreme Spirit, he is merged in it. Such illuminated sages whose sins are exhausted, who are free from delusion, who have their senses and organs under control, and devoted in the good of all creatures, obtain a assimilation with the Supreme Spirit. Assimilation with the Supreme Spirit is on both sides of death, and those are free from desire and anger, temperate, and of thoughts, restrained, and who are acquainted with this true self there. And now for the day's talk.
Okay, let me share my slides here.
Very interesting sounding talk.
Okay, can you see my slides?
I'm working at it.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, friends. Welcome to our short talk on the esoteric concepts of action and inaction as instructed by Krishna in the Gita. The ordinary meaning of action, or the layman meaning of action, implies doing something in order to accomplish an objective, whereas inaction suggests doing exactly the opposite. In other words, not taking action or not tackling a problem when there's something should have been done. However, in the Gita and the Theosophical teachings in general, these two words, action and inaction, portray a very different picture. They, in fact, encapsulate the journey of the Eternal Pilgrim towards final liberation. So let's start with discussion using the Gita as a reference before venturing into broader Theosophical teachings. First, let's recap the scenario at the beginning of the Gita. So here Arjuna has called forth the great battle between the lower and higher faculties within himself. This fight has to be pursued and won by every individual, and that is why, as Mr. Judd says, we are all Arjunas. At the onset, we are told that Arjuna called forth the conflict with Krishna as his charioteer, and without really thinking through the process himself and the consequences both to himself and others around him. So in other words, Arjuna asked for his fight without even really thinking through what are the true implications. So soon he realizes that this battle was not what he perhaps conceived to be, or maybe it was a bit too much for him. Essentially, by virtue of seeking this great battle, he has instantly aroused two sets of forces within him which naturally align themselves at opposite ends. One set of forces relate to the common, mundane, earthly existence. These are all his lower tendencies and the faculties that serve his material life. The other set pertain to the highest ideals in man, exemplified by Krishna himself. Experiencing this for the first time, Arjuna finds himself unprepared for this confrontation. His despair and despondency leads himself to believe that he cannot win. So Arjuna then declares to Krishna that he will not fight, but by now it's too late. The battle has been commenced and has to be fought till an outcome ensures, as Mr. Judge puts it. So Arjuna does not have however, doesn't have the option of simply pausing the fight. So, the title of this talk could have either read as Performance of Right Action or the Renunciation of Action. But since this great battle that we ourselves have called forth is also a reflection of the duality of nature, of our nature, which is reflected in the path of action, this student has chosen the title Action and Inaction as being more reflective of the pilgrim's journey and devotion. The interplay of action and inaction has been a central theme in the spiritual and philosophical traditions across the world, and in the Gita as well as other devotional texts. We have profound insights into the dynamics of action, inaction, and the higher spiritual implications. So we will start off by exploring the concept of action as taught in Theosophy, drawing from various texts. The concept of inaction is one of the most paradoxical and profound teachings in Theosophy. At first glance, inaction appears to imply passivity or avoidance or just not doing anything, or entertaining the desire to abandon everything, including family duties, to lead a life of seclusion. But as we will attempt to expand our understanding of during this short talk, Theosophy teaches that true inaction is a state of inner detachment, not disengagement from duty. And so during this talk on inaction, this part of inaction, we will look at inaction, the detachment from fruits of action, the illusion of passive inaction, and the highest form of inaction, which is the stillness of the soul, or learning to mold our actions in harmony with the voice of our inner silence. So let's start with the concept of detachment from the fruits of action, which is a cornerstone of Gita's teachings. One of the most profound insights in the Bhagavad Gita, as translated by Mr. Judge, is the teaching that renunciation does not mean ceasing to act, but rather acting without attachment to results. Krishna tells Arjuna, he who, having abandoned all desires, acts without longing for results, without any sense of I or mine, obtains tranquility. This statement illustrates that inaction, in its truest sense, is not the absence of physical movement, but the absence of selfish desire. When an individual acts without attachment, it transcends the binding power of karma. Theosophy embraces this principle, emphasizing that one's actions should align with the higher will rather than the personal ambitions. Bhavani Shankar expands on this by teaching us that an individual should be known as a perpetual renouncer of action and free himself from the pairs of opposites. Mr. Judge elaborates on this by explaining that the highest form of action is that which is performed with complete surrender to the divine will, or the higher self. A true theosophist does not seek personal gain or even spiritual reward, but acts in accordance with dharma, the universal law of duty. Detachment does not mean indifference, but an awareness that all actions should be conducted in the spirit of service without emotional or egotistical investment in their results. This is the essence of karma yoga, engagement in the world without attachment to its transient rewards. Krishna reminds us that the cessation of action, as defined by the complete suspension of energy, is not tenable. Based upon this, we find Krishna advising us that true action starts up upon entering the path. And this is only enabled by the right knowledge of the Spirit. Krishna further reminds us that this type of action, is indeed the right action and is a way to final liberation. Before we discuss this topic any further, let's take a few moments to talk about some of the misconceptions of the term inaction. A common misconception is that inaction means literal non-participation in worldly affairs. Many spiritual seekers mistake withdrawal from activity as spiritual progress. However, Krishna warns us against this illusion. No man ever, and he says, no man ever remains even for an instant without performing action. For everyone is involuntarily made to act by the qualities which spring from nature. And Mr. Judge expands upon this teaching by illustrating that physical inactivity does not equate to spiritual stillness. The renunciant who isolates himself from society but remains mentally engaged with desire or fear is still engaged in action. And so true action is an inner state of peace, not merely an external withdrawal. Mr. Judge advises that inaction is not allowing the worldly desires and intellectualism to prevail. Desires lead to more desires. Inaction is not being disposed to meditation. This leads the aspirant to being covetous-minded and considering heaven as the very highest good, offering as a reward for those actions and joining many special ceremonies for the sake of obtaining pleasures and domination, and preferring the transient enjoyment of heaven to eternal absorption. In fact, followers of many religions have indulged in sacrifices and ceremonies for either eternal reward or continuation of heavenly pleasures or a fortunate rebirth in riches. These are all misconceptions of inaction. Mr. Judge says that Krishna advises Arjuna against all these practices and also advises that Theosophists must refrain from similar indulgences just to gain favors of the masters. HBB, in the Voice of the Silence, echoes this sentiment, warning against the delusion of seeking enlightenment through the escape from duty. She presents the Bodhisattva ideal, in which the spiritually enlightened being chooses to remain in the world, working selflessly for benefit of humanity, rather than retreating into blissful detachment. And so this principle aligns with the greater theosophical vision that encourages seekers to engage with the world and uplift others, embodying the highest ideals of wisdom and service. Having clarified that inaction is neither physical passivity nor irresponsibility, we now turn to its highest aspect, which is spiritual stillness or inner stillness. Theosophy teaches that beyond the realm of action and inaction, there is a state of inner silence where the soul rests in divine awareness. And Krishna reveals this ultimate truth. He who perceives inaction in action and action in inaction is wise among men. This cryptic statement is often misunderstood. And so Judge again explains that the wise person perceives the eternal reality beyond changing circumstances. Such a person may be physically active in the world, but internally remains untouched because he's centered on the divine self. True inaction is also similar to dhyana or meditation. True meditation is not merely an exercise, but a living state of being. In the voice of the silence, HPB describes this as a soundless sound, the realm of divine consciousness where the fluctuations of the mind cease. This state is not achieved through external withdrawal, but through inner mastery. The Theosophist learns to function in daily life with complete awareness while remaining inwardly silent. So, in other words, the Theosophist goes about performing his duties to his family, to his co-workers, his friends, his neighbors, his theosophical friends, and still inwardly he's focused on the higher self. And this is the ultimate inaction, not passivity, but a transcendent presence that acts without being caught in the illusion of separateness. The concept of renunciation is often misunderstood in spiritual traditions. Many equate it with an ascetic lifestyle, withdrawing from all responsibilities and worldly affairs. However, the Bhagavad Gita presents a different view. Renunciation does not mean inaction, but rather acting without attachment to results. The Bhagavad Gita, especially in the teachings of Krishna to Arjuna, highlights karma yoga, which is the yoga of selfless action, as a path to final liberation. Arjuna is initially reluctant to fight, believing renunciation means abandoning action. But that's a big mistake Arjuna initially makes. Krishna corrects him, asserting that renouncing the fruits of action is greater than avoiding action altogether. Mr. Judge explains that the true battlefield is within, wherein one must renounce selfish motives rather than responsibilities. In the voice of the silence, this is expanded upon by introducing the Bodhisattva ideal, which teaches that renunciation is not merely for personal liberation, but for the benefit of all beings. The highest form of renunciation is not withdrawal from the world, but remaining within it, helping others while dissolving their personal ego. Patanjali's yoga aphorisms look at a different dimension and say that renunciation is a state of mind. True renunciation is dispassion or viraga, which allows one to act freely, unbound by desires or aversions. When one attains inner stillness, devotion becomes spontaneous, and action is performed in harmony with the divine will. Renunciation, as defined in the Bhagavad Gita, is not abandonment of duties, but relinquishment of ego-driven desires. Krishna tells Arjuna that true renunciation is an absence of attachment, not cessation of action. The analogy of a lotus leaf is often cited. Just as a leaf remains untouched by water despite being in it, one can remain in the world while being unattached. Mr. Judge reinforces this idea by criticizing those who take renunciation to mean literal withdrawal. He points out that many ascetics may still be deeply attached to the idea of their own piety. He states that true renunciation occurs when an individual ceases to act for the personal gain and instead works for the greater good of all beings. HPB, in the voice of the silence, builds on these concepts by urging aspirants to renounce the lower self, rather than renouncing material life. And she says, kill their desires, but if thou killest love, the path is lost. This means that while egoistic desires must be discarded, compassion and selfless service must remain. Renunciation is not about emotional suppression, but about transcending personal ambition. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras offer a psychological framework for understanding renunciation. And here's what Patanjali says, that attachment to pleasure and aversion to pain are the primary causes of suffering. Renunciation in this context means transcending both attraction and repulsion, allowing the practitioner to act with complete equanimity. The Bhagavad Gita provides one of the most profound discussions on renunciation through selfless action. According to Krishna, renunciation is not simply leaving behind worldly duties, but about performing one's obligations without attachment. This teaching is encapsulated in this verse. He says, "He who neither hates nor desires is known as one who has truly renounced." This perspective challenges the notion that spiritual progress necessitates complete withdrawal from society. Instead, it emphasizes that the importance of fulfilling one's responsibilities while maintaining inner detachment. Mr. Judge, in his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, argues that renunciation of external action is of little value if internal desires remain active. He explains that an individual may retreat to a monastery or a cave, but without conquering inner cravings, true renunciation has not occurred. True renunciation, or one who renounces, is one who lives in the world, engaging in daily tasks, but without selfish motivations. Judge emphasizes that the battlefield of renunciation is within the mind rather than in external circumstances. HPB, in The Voice of the Silence, takes this understanding further by linking the renunciation to the Bodhisattva ideal. And she says that Bodhisattva in the Mahayana Buddhism is one who attains enlightenment but chooses to remain in the world to assist others in their journey. This is a form of spiritual renunciation in which the individual forsakes personal salvation in favor of universal compassion. In this sense, devotion and renunciation become inseparable as one renounces the ego to serve humanity. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras frame renunciation as an inner state of detachment rather than a physical act. And Patanjali describes viraga, which is dispassion, that true renunciation is not in refraining from activity, but not in being emotionally affected by success or failure. This view aligns with Bhagavad Gita's assertion that action must be performed without attachment to results. And so by synthesizing these perspectives, we can conclude that devotion through renunciation is not about forsaking the world, but about acting within it with a detached and selfless spirit. This balance is essential for spiritual growth, as it allows an individual to contribute meaningfully to society while maintaining inner peace. Among the central teachings of several books of devotion, as well as Theosophy itself, is the idea of right performance of action, also referred to as karma yoga. The essence of karma yoga, as Mr. Judge has translated, describes it as concentration and contemplation while engaged in action. And he states that there is great difficulty in pursuing this level of contemplation, because then there is the question of faith versus works. We are often told that we're told in Theosophy that merely faith will not be sufficient, since faith is a form of action. Conversely, we will not be able to acquire true faith without action. And action will produce new karma. So then how must we pursue right action which will not result in new karma? The key here, as we employ concentration and contemplation is that we should give up all hope for reward or surrender any concern as to the outcome. On the other hand, if we perform action with a hope for a result, either favorable or unfavorable, we become bound by these consequences. One of the central themes again in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita is action, the yoga of action. And here Krishna instructs Arjuna that inaction is not an option and that everyone must engage in action according to their duty. However, he emphasizes that actions should be performed without attachment to the fruits. And this is how Mr. Judge interprets this as being a universal law that governs human existence. He states that every individual is bound by duty, and that the performance of this duty without selfish motives leads to spiritual devotion. Mr. Judge underscores Krishna's message that renouncing action is not the path to liberation. Instead, one should work in the spirit of devotion and service, offering the results of one's action to the Supreme Spirit. And this aligns with the theosophical idea that selfless service and adherence to duty contribute to the greater good of humanity and the cosmos. So Krishna equates action performed in the right spirit with devotion. He asserts that individuals should act as an offering to the Supreme Being, transforming mundane duties into acts of worship and devotion. And Mr. Judge interprets this as a crucial teaching that dissolves the barrier between the material and the spiritual. Instead of retreating from the world in pursuit of renunciation, true seekers of wisdom must engage in righteous action with an understanding that their work is part of divinity within them. Mr. Judge highlights Krishna's assertion that great souls such as the Mahatmas perform duties not because they seek personal gain, but to set an example for others and serve others. Krishna himself continues to act in the world despite having no personal necessity to do so. A critical element of karma yoga, as presented in chapter 3, is the notion of sacrifice. Krishna states that the world was created with the principle of yajna, which is sacrifice, and that by performing one's duty as a sacrifice, harmony is maintained. This idea resonates deeply with theosophical teachings, which emphasize self-sacrifice and service to humanity as essential steps on the spiritual path. Mr. Judge asserts that Krishna's teaching about yajna is a call for humanity to engage in selfless deeds, recognizing that the well-being of the world depends on the willingness of individuals to work for the greater good rather than personal gratification. Another key aspect of Krishna's teaching in this chapter is a warning against acting out of desire and selfish motives. Krishna cautions that desire and anger are the greatest enemies of spiritual progress, as they cloud judgment and lead to attachment. Mr. Judge expands on this by linking it to the theosophical principles that the lower self, driven by personal wants and emotions, must be raised by the higher self in order to attain true wisdom. Mr. Judge interprets Krishna's call to control the senses and the mind as a practical guide for spiritual aspirants. By mastering one's lower nature and aligning one's actions with divine will, an individual moves closer to self-realization. This message is particularly relevant in the modern world, where material pursuits can often overshadow ethical and spiritual considerations. The right attitude then to follow is that of performing every act, small or great, trifling or important, simply because it has to be done, as Mr. Judge says. He further says that it is merely carrying out by us as an instrument of the will that deity which is ourself. The act that pleases the Lord is the act which is done as presented with no attachment to its result. This mindset and approach is the best practice and the surest way to enter the path. This is the steady meditation we should strive to attain no matter how many times we fail. Mr. T. Subbarao advises that every man who has his duties to discharge must devote his mind to it. But says the teacher, it is one thing to perform an action as a matter of duty, and another thing to perform the same from inclination, interest, or desire. It is thus plain that it is in the power of man to make definite progress in the development of his higher faculties, whilst there is nothing in his mode of life that is to distinguish himself from his fellows. For these religions teach that it is not the nature of the act, but the mental attitude of the performer that is of importance. This is the moral teaching that runs through the whole of Bhagavad Gita. Both action and inaction must find room in the learner. We must learn to act without caring for the fruits of action. He must act and yet feel within himself that he is not the actor, says Mr. B.P. Wadia. Krishna reminds us that the path of action is obscure, and he even says that even sages have been deluded as to what is action and what is inaction. H.P. Blavatsky states that one of the subtlest forms of evil is a hope and desire for reward. Many there are who, albeit often unconsciously, are yet spoiling all the efforts by entertaining this idea of reward, allowing it to become an active factor in their lives, and so leaving the door open to anxiety, doubt, fear, despondency, and failure. So we will conclude a talk with this talk with first a poem attributed to H.P. Blavatsky called The Golden Stairs. A clean life, an open mind, a pure heart, and eager intellect, an unveiled spiritual perception, a brotherliness for all, a readiness to give and receive advice and instruction, a loyal sense to the duty of the teacher, a willing obedience to the behests of truth, once we have placed our confidence in and believe that a teacher to be in possession of it, a courageous endurance of personal injustice, a brave declaration of principles, a valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked, and a constant eye on the ideal of human progression, the performance which the secret science depicts. These are the golden stairs up the steps of which the learner may climb to the temple of divine wisdom. And finally, we can conclude with this famous line from Mahatma Gandhi, that is, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Thank you for listening, and we can open up the floor for contributions, questions. Yes.
I think one way of classifying this talk, and it's very difficult to classify, would be action through inaction.
Yes. Yeah. While I was trying to work on this, I thought of several titles. As long as it includes both, because both action and inaction, or I'll say, are aspects of true action. So yes, you can say action and inaction, right? Being in the world but not of the world.
Okay.
Performing your duties while still keeping your mind centered on the higher self.
So you have to be in the higher self to do all this stuff.
We have to have a mind, thoughts focused as best as we can. We are mortals, and the momentum of lower self keeps our minds wandering all over the place, right? But as we try to perform our duties and at the same time be detached, by being focused on the inner self, maybe reading a verse from any of the devotion texts and reflecting on them throughout the day. That's certainly one way of inaction or renouncing, right? As opposed to as is taught, right? You can leave behind all your family, renounce all worldly duties, go off in the forest or monastery, and still ponder on desires and so that's not true renunciation. So, yes.
This is beautifully laid out, and sometimes it seems sort of overwhelming, like where do I start? And I think Krishna says something about starting with what is nearest, like the senses. I guess starting there, then we can extend outwards to some of these higher stages you spoke of, where it becomes more natural.
Absolutely. I mean, we start with what is closest to you, but with a spiritual eye, so to speak. Yeah, with also, have our senses do what they naturally do without any interest in it, right? A desire is an interest in something, but our senses can be drawn to anything physically around us, but we have no interest in it, no mental interest in it. I'll start with that and gradually expand. One of the biggest, as I was reading through literature, something we should be really careful of is ambition. There's a lower ambition and then high ambition. Even sages have to be really careful about not being spiritually ambitious. So that's, as you said, but that is a much wider field, right? But you start with your mundane duties. They may be really boring, but if you start with neither likes nor dislikes, really slowly, it's a process of multiple lives. Once the and it's all uphill, right? Keep in mind we're not, and it's uphill because we have put all these obstacles in our own path through previous existence. All of us have done it. And so you start small, start as mundane duties, and as Krishna says, and Mr. Judge elaborates that there's no such thing as something too important, too little, or too less important. And the way to pursue that is again practicing viraga, the second or third paramitas. Try to be detached to what you do, mentally detached. Do something because it has to be done, and for no other reason. And that's one stepping stone to start with.
That's good advice. Thank you. We have to always have compassion as the backdrop, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in a different one of Judge's in one of his letters, he says that we should strive to feel the oneness with all, and that is the surest path to final liberation. So we cannot feel oneness with others if we don't have compassion, we don't have unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. Those are all, being benevolent to everyone, regardless of how they treat you. That is action. That's true inner action. So absolutely, you're right, Kathy. Without compassion, you're pretty much lost. I mean, that's why the voice calls it compassion is the law of laws, right? It's not just a lower attribute. It is a law that governs, the first fundamentally talked about. It pulls everything together.
I guess that's a good way to check when you're, detached, is like as a test of your motive.
Yeah.
So if we're detached, eventually our karma will unwind,
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. So so in the Gita, what Krishna says is that as long as you even have the slightest attachment, you become bound by action. When you're bound by action, you generate karma. And so really, starting in a small detachment, little by little, is the way to grow on it. And again, the motive is important as well. Why are we learning? Why are we striving to learn these beautiful theosophical teachings is to serve others. Constantly keep that in the back of our minds. As Mahatma Gandhi said, right, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service of others, and strive to do it the best you can. Not worrying about results, not being dejected when you fail, because we'll fail multiple times. It's all part and parcel of the progress.
That's hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
Hmm.
Yes.
So I revert back to washing dishes. If you can be trying to meditate and still not do it either, but this would make get the point across better. If I'm washing dishes because I'm in a hurry to do something else, and for something personal or whatever the case may be, that is getting off track. But if I'm on track, I'm washing them to try to get them as clean as possible for the use of everybody around us. That's what you're trying to get at, I believe.
Yes. Because when you do it that way, with that mindset, you're doing a duty to benefit others.
Yeah.
So you're cleaning the dishes so that others can then use them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Had a thought about prayer. A lot of folks, have a definite idea of the outcome they want to see. That's the purpose of the prayer. And that's interest in the results of action, which Krishna advises against. How could the idea of prayer be sort of shifted so that it, achieves a result that benefits all, maybe not just the person praying?
I think somewhere either Mr. Judge or Mr. Crosby equates true prayer with devotion. In other words, performing action for and as a self of all. So again, as I think you already had an answer in your question, is doing something without seeking anything in return. Because the common notion of prayer is praying for something, some benefit, right? Some benefit, whether you're ill or you're working on a difficult project at work and you're praying for a successful outcome. That is still asking for something in return.
Yeah, it's desire-based, right?
Desire, absolutely. Desire is you want something, as opposed to devote, as a chapter of one of the chapters is devotion through action, right? So that itself, from this student's understanding and reading, can be counted as true prayer.
Right. So instead of just thinking about what you want to happen, take action.
Yes. Take action so that it's a benefit has a broader benefit. In fact, HPB is, I just ran across it the other day when she calls attachment, she says that one of the subtlest form of evil is a hope and desire for reward. This is what HPB says. So she doesn't mince her words. So
No. So much that we do is based on the result of action. Yep. It's like really reverse engineering our whole thought process.
That's true, right? We are actually trying to work our way back to what we really were, right? Many lives ago, trying to regain our old memories of who we were before we plunged into, a material life, series of incarnations, right? So that's true. Reverse engineering is not a bad way of putting it. Yes.
What do you think about the Lord's Prayer? Give us this day our daily bread. Okay, that's asking for something. But then it goes on to say, as we forgive those who, who wrong us and all that stuff. So it's kind of a balance. It's a balance type process. You're getting that now. We need to have something, some kind of a physical thing to live in the material world. But it's a question of why we are trying to ask for this. Is that another way of saying
Yeah.
it?
So I think the Lord's Prayer is also a very occult prayer, right? Give us this day our daily bread is asking your higher self to provide you the instructions, asking Krishna, your charioteer, to provide you instructions to lead a good life.
Yeah. So
For benefit, so you can serve others.
the instruction to leave it because I was thinking about the food, the bread part for sustain us, but you got to have the more important part, which is the spiritual side of it, to benefit all and thrive, for everybody to thrive.
Yeah, and when the mind is free from desires, then true discrimination leading to knowledge can take place. So maybe we should look at it as, the desire for all, like, give us all our daily bread, but also the not being attached part as freeing the mind so that it has room for higher discrimination.
Yeah. If we have to escape this world of illusion, we need the higher discrimination. And to do that, we have to slowly chip away at the desires.
Yeah. Because otherwise they just clog the mind.
And
desire this, desire that, desire
yeah, and I recall, I think Mr. Judd says desires lead to more desires. And I recall your talk on dependent origination. It just keeps snowballing. You have one set of desires, and then it leads to the next set. And then, it's up to you to stop that vicious cycle. So, yeah, it's exactly. I think even the Dhammapada said that you may be engaged in meditation and follow a whole bunch of other instructions, but if you have not killed the desires, you cannot obtain liberation.
Yep. Lots of food for thought today.
Lots, absolutely. Yeah, the Gita is a beautiful instruction of how to lead a life. So
Yeah,
that little gem that we should carry with us wherever we go.
that's right. Well, it is the midnight noon, so I suppose we could stop now and for a few minutes and then start on our afternoon meeting.
Sure, maybe in 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Five is good to me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good discussion. Thank you. Yeah.